1950s, professionals said that the problem of unwed mothers was a psychological one, making them unfit to raise children. Also by the 1950s, the Florence Crittenton Association of America, the Salvation Army, Catholic Charities, and other organizations operated more than 200 maternity homes in 44 states. Young, unmarried pregnant women sometimes gave birth in these secret maternity homes, and so was the case with my mother. There are more than 400 maternity homes across the United States still today, according to the Maternity Housing Coalition. And to give us some further information on this topic, today we'll sit down with my friend Jeanette Pye Espinoza, President of National Crittenton. So now I'm at the point where I'm talking about the I guess they call it maternity. And I am trying to give some information on what happens from the standpoint of the girl or the woman that goes there, right? And of course, for the 50s, I really can't find anything because in a maternity home in the 50s or something, you know what I mean? There's like nothing. I even talked to the author of The Girls Who Went Away, that book.
Have you seen this book?
Oh yeah, oh yes.
Okay.
Yes, I
Have you
have.
talked to Karen?
I think I emailed her too. And I don't know if
Okay.
she answered me back. I know the other lady. But yeah, I saw her and see, that made me think, I was like, well, I know I wasn't under baby scoop influence because I'm here. But I don't even,
Because it
I
was
was wondering if they
mostly
baby,
white girls.
that's what I was going to say. I don't even know if like they baby scooped black girls. By the way, in case you're not familiar, from about 1945 to 1973 is a period of time known as the baby scoop era, where more than 1.5 million pregnant girls and women in the United States were sent away to maternity homes to surrender children in secret. Also, where unethical and coercive adoption industry practices were prevalent. But I was wondering how, because she was in Memphis or something. I think the lady that was the Tan, Georgia Tan or whatever. I think she was in Memphis. And interestingly enough, my mother was in Nashville. I was wondering how she might have even discovered where she should go. Because how do you get that? How do you even get that information? I mean, I wonder how.
She had her birth certificate. Like she was able to get her birth certificate. So for the Crittenden
even
homes,
for my mother to come to Kansas, not under baby scoop, but how did they find, when you're in Nashville, you're from South Carolina, a small town in South Carolina, how do you even know where to go to have a baby if you get pregnant?
Well, I would guess in her case, so for Crittenden, that those baby scoop era years, some of which overlap with the time when there were colored homes and when there weren't. It was generally the parents, right, who found the home.
Right.
And generally they didn't want them to be in their home community.
Right.
And in our history, those were the decades, frankly, when the girls who were coming into Crittenden homes were more middle class, predominantly white, not a lot of historic trauma, at least at the time, and so they were really hidden away by their families.
Right.
And that's before and after that. That was not the Crittenden philosophy, and. So they to some degree had different access because of relative privilege to records and connections than Black girls. I have not, and I'll be honest, I think I have probably talked to only, besides you, maybe only one other woman of color that was born in a Crittenden agency during that period of time, and she also stayed with her mother. She was raised by her mother.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like, and I don't have any. I think that Karen would probably agree with me. Karen, who wrote the book, would probably agree with me. But I really think that what we saw in the baby scoop era was kind of the height of privilege and racism, where, for the white girls, there was a perception on the part of the burgeoning social work field that they had more opportunities. Like, you don't want to have a baby because you can become a doctor or a
Right,
teacher, you
right.
can
You
go
said
to
you had all
college.
these goals that you wanted to do. How are you going to do
Right,
the baby? Right.
right. And for girls of color, being a mom was being a mom and doing the responsible thing was more. There's a different value placed on that
Right.
in families and communities of color. Like,
Right.
so you got pregnant, so now you need to do the right thing. Ann
Right.
Fessler, not Ann Fessler, but Catherine Eden wrote a book called Promises I Can Keep, which is about which is about the economics of early parenthood and single motherhood, where she kind of hints at this, that it's a perception of opportunity and value that
Right.
really created the distinction between what girls were forced to place their children up for adoptions because they had so many other better options.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was reading about that and I was thinking about that as I was thinking about my mother's situation. And then
Hmm.
I'm still thinking to myself, okay, my mother was the youngest of nine, and her parents were just farmers in South
Hmm.
Carolina. You know what I mean? Now, my mother did very well in school, which is how she got her scholarship and how she got to Fisk. So maybe someone in the town or something knew, because I'm just looking at that. This is a really small town. I mean, to get all the way to Kansas, and also maybe that was the closest. Oh, I know what. My genealogist guy told me there was only certain ones that black girls could go to.
Hmm.
Maybe that was another situation where
Hmm.
wherever the other ones were, which I have no idea where they were,
Hmm.
primarily in the north, maybe
Hmm.
I think. And so maybe
Yeah.
it's the only one. And then he also said, which maybe you can answer this question too. He said that there were rules. There were rules sometimes where if you got pregnant again, you couldn't go back to the same home. Do you know if that was the case in Crittenden? You know what
Right.
I mean? So, or maybe you
Right.
give your kid up for adoption better in Kansas City or something than you do in Topeka. I don't
Oh,
really know. I'm just trying to.
yeah. As far as I know, there's never been a rule that you can't come
Go
back to the
back.
Crittenden home. Um, it could have been, and I don't know. Maybe you remember. I don't know off the top of my mind when the Kansas colored home closed and when the Missouri colored home closed. So
I
it
thought it was in
may
like 56-ish or something like that.
so close to each other because
Yeah.
I don't know whether one closed. There was never those colored homes were initially not endorsed by National.
Mm.
Those really sprung out of, yeah, there was never at the national level any conversation or decision or directive made about segregation. Never that
Interesting.
I can find.
Interesting.
Those really came up at the local level where there was more pressure, right, to segregate.
Oh,
Nationally, that was never, even in the very early writings, everything was to be open to everyone, regardless of
right.
race, religion. And so it was actually Dr. Barrett who brought Sarah Malone, who was running I think it was Kansas. I can look it up, but I don't
I think it
remember
was
off the top of my
Kansas.
head.
I thought it was Kansas.
Um, engaged her in the national work at the
Uh-huh.
national level um, to serve as a model for how leadership should be integrated.
Where what was she doing before? Like she wasn't always, but she was with Crittenden for a while though, wasn't she? Like before
Dr. Barrett,
these. No, Sarah Malone.
I don't
She
know what
was,
she was doing before.
yeah, because I think I looked up like in one of those places where they have the files or something. And I think she had been doing other stuff, Crittenton, like before the 50s. She was getting a little bit older by the time the 50s came around. When I was in Ancestry.com, they had
Uh-huh.
the census for 1950, and the Crittenton home was on there for the colored girls. And so it
Hmm.
shows my mom on the list. And I think there was like three other girls. And then, so I forget the name of the lady, whoever was the head, Harriet, I think, Harriet, something like that,
Hmm.
was the head, showed their ages. All the other girls were like 14, 17, 14. I think two of them were like 14, 15, and then I think one was 17.
Wow.
My mother was 21. She was like a grown woman, by that. So at least I
Hmm.
have something right, at least like show up on the, well, not me, but my mother shows up on the census.
Right.
That was kind of interesting.
Right.
But anyway, let's take a break for a second on this topic and have you just introduce yourself to everyone so they kind of know who I'm talking to here and what you
Sure.
do. So go ahead.
Sure. Sure. So my name is Jeanette Paya Spinoza. I'm president of National Crittenton. I have been here since 2007. I was brought in to sort of lead the reinvention of National Crittenton. Um, National Crittenton had been somewhat dormant since the 1970s when it merged with the Child Welfare League of America. And so I was asked to come in and to raise the profile and raise the ante, I guess, if you will,
Right.
on advocating with and for girls and gender expansive young people of color.
Right. And we were talking a little bit about what we thought was going on, like, maybe like as far back as the 50s, but
Mm-hmm.
Crittenton's been around, was it in the 20s when it started?
1883.
Oh, whoa, it had been around a while.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, okay, so 1883. So between 1883 and when did it really start to, the focus kind of started to change, it appears to me, on the kinds of things that they were offering the girls that were there, as far as the education or helping them with the babies or whatever. How do you see the evolution
Mm-hmm.
of Crittenton?
Sure. So, in the very beginning, in 1883, we were founded really by Charles Crittenden and Dr. Barrett because they realized that there were not places for women to go to change the trajectory of their lives because all of the refuge homes and the sort of social services as we know them today were focused on men. And so we were founded to support and work with a couple specific populations. One has always been single mothers and young single mothers, women who were engaged in forced prostitution or trafficking,
Mm,
women who were leaving violent relationships, and immigrant women who came over with the promise of a husband, got off the boat in the 1800s, and there was no one there to meet them, so they were left to their own devices. By the early 1900s, we were largely focused on um, the same population, but really leaning towards single mothers, young and older single mothers, um, as well as women who were involved in the either youth or adult criminal justice system,
mm,
and those who were homeless. Um, those things have not changed in 140 years. We celebrated our 140th anniversary in April of this year. Those things have not changed. How we have engaged with them have changed. So by the early 1900s, there were 76 Crittenton homes in 5 countries. Today, there are 26 serving 30 states and the District of Columbia. And true to the original Crittenden model, those local agencies are designed, their services are designed around the needs of the local community. So from the 1900s well into probably the early 70s, the focus was almost solely on juvenile justice involved young
mm.
women and young mothers. And so that's the time where the maternity home became sort of the predominant model of the Crittenton agencies, Crittenton homes around the country. That changed in the 1970s with access to birth control and with the passage of Roe versus Wade. Those agencies then began to shift the way they operated and focused to be really still support young mothers in a holistic way, but also began to look at young mothers that were involved in the child welfare system or the juvenile justice system.
Wow, that's interesting. Mm-hmm. Well, you know, it was a really a big shock to me when I sent for my original birth certificate, because up until I sent for my original birth certificate, I mean, I knew something was up, but I had no idea that there was such a thing as an original birth certificate. Because when I questioned my mother about her not being because I didn't think she was my mother exactly either. But when I questioned her about being my mother and this guy about being my father, and she flipped this birth certificate on me that had both of their names on it, it really threw me for a loop, because for a really long time, because no one, whoever I would confide in to tell them that, what my suspicions were or whatever, I think they would just think that I was too young. Because how could you really know? Because people always ask me, like, well, you know, that doesn't make any sense. How do you know that? Why do you know that? Or whatever. Mm-hmm. And I was like, well, I don't know why. I just know. And but every time I would ask my mother something, first of all, she would ask me why I needed the information, why I needed the birth certificate. Well, because when you're doing certain things, you need a birth certificate, right? It was like a big deal. Like, she was like the 20 questions, like, what do you think I'm going to try to do with it? Try to sell it or something, you know? And she gave me the birth certificate, but there was never any discussion about anything about my birth, because I don't even think the fake birth certificate, I call it fake. I don't think the fake amended birth certificate has any information on it about my weight or anything either. But I think I looked up the other day where in the old days, they didn't put that information on there. Anyway, so maybe that was just, you know, the standard birth certificate. But I was all the way to about 34 or 36 before I found out that there was such a thing as an original birth certificate. And the way I found that out was, since I didn't think that my father was my father, and I knew that I started living with them in Ohio, I thought, I'm going to contact the protective child services or something in Ohio and just ask them if there's a way that I can find out if there's any information about me on file or whatever. So then when I wrote to them, they said, well, you were born in Kansas, so we can't really help you. So, but you can send for your birth certificate through like a, you know, whatever, original, whatever, through the state of Kansas. So they sent me the information, I got the form, I had to sign whatever, and I sent it off. And then when it came back is when I got the birth certificate that had the stamp on the back that said adoption occurred subsequent to birth. And that's where I saw the Florence Crittenton part on there. Before that, I didn't really think that that was the case. I just thought she got pregnant, you know, gave me to her sister or whatever, and then went on down the road. So then I kind of was trying to get her to like give me some information, because now I have a little bit of info. But of course, she wasn't going to give up any information. So later on is when I contacted you, because when I had tried to find out before, they had just told me that the place had burned down and that all the records were lost. And so I said, well, I'm just gonna write an email somebody and see. I'm gonna tell them what my story is and see if somebody will answer me or whatever. I was so surprised when I actually got a response from you. You know, and you were really helping me out. What did you think when you got that email?
Well, you know, I have to say, Devin, I have heard some
stories, huh?
I mean, we have, not just me, other staff here, we have heard all kinds of stories about things that mothers did to protect their
Cover up.
children, their daughters. Um, yeah, I talked to one woman who sent her daughter, sent her older daughter away, or yes, sent her older daughter away, and made a, and this was like in the early 1900s, made a belly for her older daughter all the time when it was actually her younger daughter that was pregnant. Anyhow, it's a long story, but
Oh,
I I um I thought you knew what you're talking. I have not talked to anybody who actually, as crazy as it might have sounded, wasn't right.
wow.
Like maybe didn't have the answers,
Right.
but knew the questions.
Right.
And I've talked to mothers who have gone back to Crittenton homes at 85, 98, and stood in the spot where the last place that they held their child,
Wow.
uh, and felt it, and you hear it in their voices, right? Felt the pain of that moment, not decreased much since that day. So I don't. I always believe. I mean, look at all the research that you've had to do, right?
I
I mean,
know.
you don't do that if it's not part of your heart and soul.
Right. Right.
You just don't. And I've heard some incredible stories, very positive, uplifting, and some really tragic, very tragic. Social media has really, really increased the numbers of people who've contacted us, and so
Yeah, I
I
bet.
really, I think in your case was confusing to me because both of the agencies were still open, right?
Right.
Kansas and Missouri
Right.
was still open, and I think it wasn't until I told you, right, one night, I think I called you or emailed you and said, "Look, I was in the shower or something," and because we had never seen each other,
Right.
there
Right.
was no
Oh yeah.
Zoom.
Yeah. That you had to find out I was black.
Yeah, and I asked you, "Are
Or
you
didn't
black?"
say that.
because because from that time period, most of the women I talked to were not women of color.
Right. Right.
And that's
So
I don't
like,
remember
where
where I
are
was.
you
It just
black?
helped me like a bolt of lightning, right? Where you wouldn't be able to find your records if you were born in a colored home and you were looking in the records of one of the white homes. And
Right.
so, in that case, you are very unique. I've never, I've not talked
Right.
with
Right.
anyone.
And see, it never even occurred to me to even mention it because I figured the home was the home, and I wasn't even thinking about segregation. I was just thinking, okay, there's a home, and there's these people that are in it, right? And so I never even thought to even say, oh yeah, I'm black, by the way, because there was segregation. It never even occurred to me, you know what I mean?
Right.
Don't do it
And
now.
I never thought to ask you because they weren't very they actually weren't open very long if you think about
No,
how long our history is. And so yeah, it was a moment. I didn't think you were crazy. I thought you were
yeah,
onto something. You had questions that needed to be answered.
right, right,
And we've always believed that whether we can answer those questions or not, there's some way we
right.
can contribute in a positive way to your journey to find the answer, to yours and everybody else's.
Well, you really helped me because before that, I mean, I was just the crazy girl out there. Oh, why do you think, of course, of course, of course, and so that was the first time that I even got any information on anything because I had been like so lost. I mean, you would have thought I just popped out of the sky or something. And at age
Mm-hmm.
6, it was just because I had no life prior to age 6. I mean, I had my aunt and my uncles, but it was a different life. You know what I mean? It was like she took me away from that life and then
Mm-hmm.
plopped me down in this new life. But information that she gave about herself and her life, there was none because she never said anything. Like I didn't even know about the scholarships or anything. I think
Mm-hmm.
she was already passed away before I even found out about that. What do you
Mm-hmm.
think, or what's the situation at Crittenton as far as um, adoptions go? Like, did it act as an adoption agency more? And if they were dealing, especially like if they were dealing with people that had issues or criminal records, or things like that. Were they acting more along the lines of trying to protect the baby? And
Mhm.
they would try to get the women to, because it
Mhm.
wasn't a baby scoop or anything, but try to get the women to like place their babies in homes, or were they more along the lines of trying to help the mothers to be able to keep the children, or did that change over?
Sure, sure. Except for those years that are called the baby scoop era, Crittenden's priority always was, and Dr. Barrett is the one who advanced this along with Charles Crittenden, was that mother, child, family, and society would be better if mothers and children stay together.
Stay together.
So that's how our whole maternity um, movement, maternity home work really started. Was, in fact, initially to even be admitted to a Crittenden agency, you had to commit to stay postpartum for 6 to 12 months to
Mm,
ensure that there was a healthy start,
wow.
that the bonding occurred. Yes. And after the baby scoop era, those organizations that continued to run maternity homes continued that. Not only was that a requirement, there was a requirement for education, for some kind of workforce training, which might have been at some point in time learning how to be a maid or sewing or whatever the options were. Those places today that still have residential maternity programs, it's still very consistent. Before and after the baby scoop era, and I think, as I said earlier, I think that's really because of who the moms were that were coming in. So during this baby scoop era, some of the families were paying for their daughters,
Mm.
daughters, sisters, whatever's,
Mm.
to stay. Before and after that period of time, the services were either free or subsidized by public agency contracts. Those that are open now are largely supported with child welfare money, as well as independent funding, nonprofit and foundation funding.
So when you think when my mother came along, do you think there was a charge for her to come to?
I doubt it. I doubt it. But I don't know. I can't.
Yeah. And also, like I also the one thing I also noticed was that, and I had read this too, like on the adoption intake form or whatever they call it. I noticed at the bottom it because I read somewhere where they said that I like you had to, if you were going to give your baby up for adoption or something, you weren't supposed to breastfeed.
Right.
Yeah. So I guess it was maybe she already knew what she was going to do,
Yeah.
when she went there.
Well,
And
and in some instances, they weren't able to see or hold their babies before they relinquished
oh
them.
right, oh yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It really, and so I don't know anybody anymore who's still around. Our one of our former board members was actually, a couple of them were actually executive directors during the baby scoop era, but they're not around anymore. Um, Crittenden, some of the local Crittenden homes did do adoptions. Some still do, but they are by and large open adoptions. But I will tell you, as long as I've been around, I would say of them young moms that come into Crittenden mother baby, call them mother baby programs now, they don't relinquish. Maybe 2% will choose adoption, and if they do, it's predominantly open, and open adoption where they stay involved in the life of the child.
Right, right. What do you think?
Very few.
What do you think about this? And you might not have any information on this, but it just popped in my head and I was thinking about it. So I've been watching these shows where they're trying to pass these different, I guess, laws in different states so that they can get the files open, so that after a certain age, I guess, or whatever, people can go in and get information surrounding them. But do you think, I don't know, like if you would even know about this. So I actually, was adopted by my stepfather in 1950
Mhm, mhm,
in Ohio. So I do have the adoption decree, which I found
mhm.
buried between the deed of the house when my mother was passing away, and I was determined I was not coming out of that room. I found all kinds of stuff when I was in there. So I was like, so I found that. Do you think that there's any information that could possibly be available besides the decree that would be attached to the record if I now maybe try to go back and contact Ohio, since they are open now? If I could, if there's anything, or do
It
you
could be.
decrees, or
There could be.
because I think someone else told me that, like, too, like because it was my mother. It wasn't like they weren't giving me up. She wasn't giving me up to someone, that maybe there wasn't even any other information, so she could do what she wanted to do. So like if she just decided that this man was gonna adopt, she could just be the one to just say it, and then they just issued a decree. And
Well, but she would have had to prove that she was your mother, and she would have had to prove that your birth father had no claim over you.
okay. Yeah. Okay, so I'm gonna check on that. And then regarding the whole birth father thing, so I they helped me at the locator's place, and they're pretty sure that the guy that they have, I know I've tried to push back. I don't think that's the right guy. But anyway, I had someone from the NAAP, uh,
Mm-hmm.
the Search Angels, go back into my ancestry DNA stuff and
Mm-hmm.
look and see, because the therapist was saying, well, you never know, like maybe, they could have missed something or whatever. So it's good to like have somebody else double check it, because the
Right.
people that are doing the Search Angel stuff have a different kind of a
Right.
connection to what's going on than like the paid private eye type people. So anyway,
Right.
so she went back and looked it up, and she said she agrees that pretty much that is probably who it is. So I just have to be